Months later, when Attorney General Daniel Cameron presented the charges against Hankerson and said that Mattingly and Cosgrove's actions were justified, he emphasised that police did properly announce themselves.
Evidence shows that officers both knocked and announced their presence at the apartment.
But
the silence of the night was broken by the sound of splintering wood and shouting voices. In apartment 4 at 3003 Springfield Drive in Louisville, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor jolted awake from her peaceful sleep, her heart racing as confusion and terror washed over her. It was just after midnight on March 13, 2020, and what should have been another quiet evening with her boyfriend Kenneth Walker had suddenly transformed into a nightmare that would forever change the course of American history. Breonna Taylor was born on June 5, 1993, in Michigan, into a world that would both challenge and shape her into the remarkable woman she would become. Her early years were spent in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where she was raised primarily by her devoted mother, Tamika Palmer. From the very beginning, Breonna displayed the kind of warmth and determination that would define her character throughout her short but impactful life. Her mother often spoke of how even as a child, Breonna possessed an innate ability to make others feel heard and valued, a quality that would later serve her well in her chosen profession of helping others during their most vulnerable moments. The Taylor family faced their share of struggles during Breonna's childhood. Like many single mothers, Tamika Palmer worked tirelessly to provide for her daughters, instilling in them the values of hard work, compassion, and resilience. Breonna watched her mother navigate the challenges of life with grace and determination, lessons that would deeply influence her own approach to adversity. The bond between mother and daughter was unbreakable, forged through shared experiences and mutual respect that would only grow stronger as Breonna matured into adulthood. In 2008, she moved to Louisville, Kentucky, with her mother and younger sister, Junaya, marking a new chapter in the Taylor family's journey. The move to Louisville represented hope and opportunity, a chance for a fresh start in a city that promised better prospects for the future. Breonna adapted to her new environment with the same resilience she had learned from her mother, embracing the challenges that came with starting over in an unfamiliar place. Taylor attended Western High School, where she was an honor roll student who enjoyed mathematics. Her academic excellence was not merely the result of natural intelligence, though she certainly possessed that in abundance. Breonna approached her studies with the same methodical dedication she brought to every aspect of her life. Her teachers recognized something special in her, noting not only her intellectual capabilities but also her character. Her teachers described her as a natural leader who also was compassionate toward others. During her high school years, Breonna's personality truly began to shine. She was the kind of student who would stay after class to help struggling classmates understand difficult concepts, particularly in mathematics, which came naturally to her. Her friends remember her as someone who could light up a room with her infectious laugh, someone who made everyone feel included and valued. She had a way of seeing the potential in people that they sometimes couldn't see in themselves, encouraging them to push beyond their perceived limitations. The hallways of Western High School were filled with the energy and ambition of young people dreaming of their futures, but Breonna stood out among her peers. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that was both inspiring and comforting to those around her. Teachers and classmates alike were drawn to her positive energy and her genuine interest in the well-being of others. It was during these formative years that Breonna began to envision a future where she could make a meaningful difference in people's lives. As graduation approached in 2011, Breonna had already begun to chart her course toward a career in healthcare. The decision wasn't made lightly or without consideration of the challenges that lay ahead. She understood that the medical field would demand everything she had to give and more, but she was prepared for that sacrifice. Her motivation came from a deep-seated desire to be present during people's most critical moments, to be a source of comfort and competence when they needed it most. After completing her high school education, Breonna set her sights on higher learning, enrolling at the University of Kentucky. The transition from high school to university brought new challenges and opportunities for growth. College life in Kentucky exposed her to a broader world of ideas and experiences, expanding her understanding of the complexities of life and deepening her commitment to serving others. Her studies were rigorous, but Breonna approached them with the same determination that had carried her through high school. During her time at the University of Kentucky, Breonna began to focus more specifically on her career goals in healthcare. She was particularly drawn to emergency medicine, attracted by the fast-paced environment and the opportunity to make immediate, life-saving differences in people's lives. The emergency room represented everything she valued about healthcare: the need for quick thinking, compassion under pressure, and the ability to provide hope in the darkest moments. While pursuing her education, Breonna also began working to gain practical experience in the medical field. She found work as an emergency room technician, a role that would become central to her identity and purpose. This position allowed her to bridge the gap between her academic studies and real-world application, giving her invaluable hands-on experience while she continued her education. Working in the emergency room was both challenging and rewarding for Breonna. She encountered people at their most vulnerable moments, dealing with everything from minor injuries to life-threatening conditions. Her colleagues quickly recognized her natural ability to remain calm under pressure while maintaining the empathy and compassion that patients desperately needed during their medical crises. She had a gift for making scared children feel safe and helping anxious family members understand what was happening to their loved ones. The emergency room at the University of Louisville Hospital became Breonna's second home. She worked long shifts, often staying late to ensure that her patients received the care they needed. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed by the medical staff, who came to rely on her competence and caring nature. Doctors and nurses alike praised her ability to anticipate needs, her attention to detail, and her unwavering commitment to patient care. Breonna's work in the emergency room also deepened her understanding of the healthcare system and the challenges facing both patients and providers. She witnessed firsthand the impact of social and economic factors on health outcomes, seeing how access to care could mean the difference between life and death. These experiences reinforced her commitment to eventually becoming a nurse, a goal that would allow her to have an even greater impact on patient care and outcomes. As her professional life flourished, Breonna's personal life was also evolving. She had always been selective about the people she allowed into her inner circle, preferring deep, meaningful relationships over casual acquaintances. Her approach to friendship was the same as her approach to patient care. She invested fully in the people who mattered to her, offering support, encouragement, and unwavering loyalty. It was during this period of growth and stability that Breonna met Kenneth Walker. Their relationship began as many do, with mutual attraction and shared interests, but it quickly developed into something deeper and more meaningful. Kenneth, who worked as a postal worker, was drawn to Breonna's intelligence, compassion, and zest for life. She, in turn, appreciated his steady nature, his sense of humor, and his genuine care for her well-being. Before police killed her, Breonna Taylor and Kenneth Walker III were discussing marriage and possible names for their future kids, and had even bought a pair of baby Air Jordans for their would-be child. Their relationship had evolved to the point where they were making concrete plans for their future together. The small pair of baby Air Jordans represented more than just a cute purchase. They symbolized hope, dreams, and the family they planned to build together. Kenneth and Breonna's relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Walker has a close relationship with Palmer and Taylor's younger sister, Junia, who lived with Taylor. The fact that Kenneth had developed such a strong bond with Breonna's family spoke volumes about the seriousness of their relationship and his character. Tamika Palmer, who was fiercely protective of her daughters, welcomed Kenneth into their family circle, recognizing the happiness he brought to Breonna's life. She was away on a trip on March 13th, referring to Breonna's younger sister Junia, whose absence that night would later feel like a small mercy in the midst of tragedy. The Taylor family had always been close-knit, with the sisters sharing not just living space but also dreams, fears, and daily experiences. Junia looked up to her older sister, seeing in Breonna a role model of strength, compassion, and determination. By early 2020, Breonna's life seemed to be falling into place. She was excelling in her career, had found love with Kenneth, and was making progress toward her ultimate goal of becoming a registered nurse. Her apartment on Springfield Drive represented independence and stability, a place where she could build the life she had worked so hard to achieve. The space was modest but comfortable, filled with the warmth and personality that Breonna brought to everything she touched. The apartment complex where Breonna lived was typical of many in Louisville, a mix of young professionals, families, and students trying to make their way in the world. Neighbors knew Breonna as the friendly young woman who always had a smile and a kind word, someone who would help carry groceries or check on elderly residents. She had created a sense of community wherever she went, bringing people together through her natural warmth and genuine interest in others' well-being. During the winter and early spring of 2020, as the world began to grapple with the emerging COVID-19 pandemic, Breonna's role in the emergency room became even more critical. Healthcare workers everywhere were facing unprecedented challenges, dealing with a new and dangerous virus that threatened both patients and providers. Breonna approached these challenges with the same dedication and courage she had always shown, understanding that her work was more important than ever. The stress of working in healthcare during a pandemic was immense, but Breonna found comfort and support in her relationship with Kenneth and her close family ties. After long, difficult shifts at the hospital, she would come home to the stability and love that Kenneth provided. Their relationship had become her anchor during uncertain times, a source of strength that helped her continue the demanding work of caring for others. As March 2020 progressed, Breonna and Kenneth were settling into a routine that balanced the demands of their careers with their personal relationship. They spent evenings together discussing their days, planning for their future, and simply enjoying each other's company. They were discussing marriage and possible names for their future kids, conversations that filled their quiet moments with hope and anticipation for what lay ahead. The night of March 12, 2020, began like many others for Breonna and Kenneth. After a long day at work, they spent the evening together in the comfort of Breonna's apartment. They watched television, talked about their plans for the weekend, and enjoyed the peaceful domesticity that had become precious to both of them. As they prepared for bed, neither could have imagined that their world was about to be shattered in ways they could never have anticipated. Kenneth had been staying over more frequently, and their relationship had reached a level of comfort and commitment that spoke to its permanence. They had developed the easy intimacy of a couple planning a life together, sharing daily routines, inside jokes, and quiet moments of contentment. The apartment felt like home to both of them, a sanctuary from the outside world where they could simply be themselves. As they settled in for the night, Breonna likely thought about the next day's work schedule, perhaps mentally preparing for another shift in the emergency room. Kenneth may have been thinking about his own work responsibilities or weekend plans they had discussed. Neither was thinking about danger or violence. They were simply two people in love, preparing for another night's rest in the safety of their own home. the Louisville Metro Police Department had been conducting an investigation that would intersect tragically with Breonna's life. Detectives were focused on Jamarcus Glover, Breonna's ex-boyfriend, who was suspected of drug trafficking. In their investigation, police had identified several locations they believed were connected to Glover's alleged activities, including Breonna's apartment. The connection was tenuous at best, but it was enough for police to seek and obtain a search warrant for her home. The warrant obtained by Louisville police was what's known as a no-knock warrant, meaning officers were authorized to enter the premises without announcing their presence or giving occupants time to respond. These warrants are typically reserved for situations where police believe that announcing their presence would result in the destruction of evidence or pose a danger to officers. The decision to seek this type of warrant for Breonna's apartment would later become a central point of controversy in the case. On the evening of March 12th, as Breonna and Kenneth were settling in for the night, police were making final preparations for simultaneous raids at multiple locations connected to their investigation. The operation was planned to begin in the early morning hours of March 13th, when they expected to find the locations occupied but the occupants asleep, theoretically making the raids safer and more likely to preserve any evidence. The three officers assigned to execute the warrant at Breonna's apartment were Detective Miles Cosgrove, Detective Brett Hankison, and Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly. These were experienced officers who had participated in similar operations before, but nothing in their training or experience could have prepared them for how tragically wrong this particular operation would go. As the clock approached midnight, Breonna and Kenneth were likely already asleep, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The apartment was quiet and peaceful, filled with the ordinary possessions and dreams of two young people building a life together. In just a few hours, that peace would be shattered in a hail of gunfire and confusion that would leave one person dead, another traumatized, and a family forever broken. The moments leading up to the police arrival were the last of normalcy that Kenneth Walker would ever experience with Breonna Taylor. Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, was inside the apartment with her when the plainclothes officers knocked on the door and then forced entry. The officers were not in uniform, adding to the confusion and terror that would follow. Just after midnight on March 13, 2020, the sound of forceful knocking shattered the silence of the Springfield Drive apartment. Both Breonna and Kenneth were jolted awake, immediately disoriented and frightened by the aggressive nature of the sounds. In those first moments of consciousness, neither could process what was happening or why someone would be pounding on their door with such violence in the middle of the night. Kenneth would later describe the terrifying confusion of those moments, the way fear gripped both of them as they tried to understand what was happening. They called out, asking who was at the door, but received no clear response that they could understand. The pounding continued, becoming more aggressive and threatening with each passing second. Walker described their fear and confusion as police busted down the front door. The next sound they heard was the splintering of wood as the door gave way under the force of the police battering ram. In the darkness and chaos, Kenneth could barely process what was happening. Men were shouting, rushing into the apartment with weapons drawn, but in the darkness and confusion, neither Kenneth nor Breonna could immediately identify them as police officers. Acting on instinct and believing that intruders were breaking into their home, Kenneth reached for his legally owned firearm. As a law-abiding citizen with a concealed carry permit, he had every right to defend himself and Breonna from what appeared to be a home invasion. In the terror and confusion of the moment, with unidentified men bursting through their door in the middle of the night, his response was both legal and understandable. Walker fired only one bullet, a single shot that struck Sergeant Mattingly in the leg. This single bullet, fired in what Kenneth believed was self-defense against home invaders, would trigger a barrage of return fire that would prove fatal for Breonna. The officers, believing they were under attack, responded with overwhelming force, firing multiple rounds into the apartment in the darkness. Walker described their fear and confusion as police busted down the front door and killed the 26-year-old emergency room technician. In the chaos that followed, with bullets flying in multiple directions, Breonna Taylor was struck multiple times. The young woman who had dedicated her life to saving others in medical emergencies was herself in desperate need of the kind of care she had provided to countless patients. The gunfire seemed to last forever but was actually over in a matter of seconds. When the shooting stopped, the apartment was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the sound of Kenneth's anguished cries, and the terrible silence from Breonna. Kenneth, uninjured but in shock, found himself surrounded by police officers, his world forever changed by a few moments of violence and confusion. Breonna Taylor, the 26-year-old emergency room technician who had spent her career helping others during their most critical moments, was beyond the help that she had so expertly provided to others. Taylor was shot and killed in her apartment by Louisville police last March. The dreams, plans, and love that had filled her life just moments before were now reduced to evidence in a criminal investigation. Kenneth Walker was immediately handcuffed and taken into custody, charged with attempted murder for shooting Sergeant Mattingly. In his shock and grief, he could barely comprehend what had happened, let alone understand the legal jeopardy he now faced. The man who had been planning a future with Breonna, discussing baby names and buying tiny shoes for children not yet conceived, was now facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison for trying to defend the woman he loved. The scene in the apartment was one of devastating aftermath. The home that had been filled with love, laughter, and dreams just hours before was now a crime scene, marked by bullet holes, blood, and the shattered remnants of a life cut tragically short. The small pair of baby Air Jordans that Breonna and Kenneth had bought together served as a heartbreaking reminder of the future that would never be. As news of the shooting began to spread, Breonna's family was thrust into a nightmare that no parent should ever have to endure. "I can't believe it's a year later and we're still just asking people to do the right thing," her mother said recently. Tamika Palmer's words, spoken a year after her daughter's death, captured the frustration and pain of a mother who had lost her child and was still fighting for answers and accountability. The initial response from Louisville Metro Police Department was to characterize the shooting as justified, claiming that officers had announced themselves before entering and that they had returned fire only after being shot at. However, as details began to emerge, significant questions arose about the accuracy of these initial claims and the circumstances that led to the deadly encounter. On March 8, 2021, Stevens dismissed the criminal charges against Walker with prejudice, meaning he cannot be recharged for the shooting. The dismissal of charges against Kenneth was a recognition that his actions on that terrible night were those of a man trying to protect himself and the woman he loved from what he reasonably believed to be intruders in their home. In September 2020, Walker filed a suit against the Louisville Metro Police Department, accusing it of misconduct and asserting he did not fire the bullet that injured Mattingly. Kenneth's lawsuit represented not just his search for justice, but also his attempt to process and understand the trauma he had experienced and to ensure that no other family would have to endure what he and Breonna's family had suffered. Walker, a middle child, has leaned on his two sisters and parents and on Taylor's family since her death. The support of family became crucial for Kenneth as he struggled to cope with the loss of Breonna and the trauma of that night. She said Walker would have died for Taylor, a testament to the depth of their relationship and the devastating impact of her loss on his life. The investigation into Breonna Taylor's death revealed significant problems with the police operation that led to her killing. Questions were raised about the validity of the warrant, the decision to conduct a no-knock raid, and the actions of the officers involved. As these details became public, Breonna's case became a rallying cry for police reform and racial justice across the United States. "But we don't want this at all," Austin said. "We want her back." These words from Breonna's aunt, Bianca Austin, captured the heartbreaking reality faced by her family. While they were grateful that Breonna's story had gained national attention and sparked important conversations about police reform, they would have given anything to have her back alive and well. The pain of Breonna's family was compounded by what they saw as a lack of accountability and transparency from the Louisville Metro Police Department and city officials. Breonna Taylor was killed on March 13 when 3 Louisville police officers executed a no-knock search warrant, and months later her mother is still looking for answers. The search for truth and justice became a full-time occupation for Tamika Palmer and other family members who refused to let their daughter's death be swept under the rug. As the investigation continued and public pressure mounted, details emerged that painted a troubling picture of the events leading up to and following Breonna's death. The warrant that led police to her apartment was based on information suggesting that her ex-boyfriend had been using her address to receive packages, but the two were not in a relationship, and the Sprint phone records for Breonna's phone confirmed that there were no communications between the two on the phone. The revelation that Breonna had no ongoing relationship with her ex-boyfriend and that there was no evidence of criminal activity at her apartment raised serious questions about why police had targeted her home for a violent, middle-of-the-night raid. Palmer labeled the warrant an invasion of privacy. The lack of evidence connecting Breonna to any criminal activity made her death even more tragic and senseless. As the months passed and the case gained national attention, Breonna Taylor's name became synonymous with the fight for police accountability and racial justice. Protesters across the country chanted her name alongside those of other Black Americans killed by police, demanding systemic changes to prevent similar tragedies. Protesters hold up signs on June 3, 2020, during a Breonna Taylor and Black Lives Matter protest in New York City. The case attracted attention from celebrities, politicians, and activists who used their platforms to demand justice for Breonna and her family. Her story resonated with people across racial and socioeconomic lines, as many could identify with the basic human desire to feel safe in one's own home. The fact that she was killed while sleeping in her own apartment, having committed no crime, struck many as a fundamental violation of the social contract between police and the communities they serve. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, a Democrat, tweeted a statement in support of Taylor's family, including her mother, Tamika Palmer. Political leaders at various levels were forced to address the questions raised by Breonna's case, including the use of no-knock warrants and the need for greater police accountability. The legal proceedings following Breonna's death were complex and often frustrating for her family and supporters. While Kenneth Walker was eventually cleared of all charges, the officers involved in the raid faced varying degrees of accountability. Current and former Louisville, Kentucky police officers charged with federal crimes related to death of Breonna Taylor, indicating that federal authorities eventually stepped in to pursue charges when local prosecutors failed to hold the officers fully accountable. The federal investigation represented hope for Breonna's family, who had grown frustrated with what they saw as a lack of serious consequences for the officers whose actions led to her death. An ongoing federal investigation could be wide-ranging and is regarded by many as the last chance for justice for Taylor's death. Throughout the legal proceedings and public attention, Breonna's family worked to ensure that she was remembered not just as a victim, but as a person who had lived a full and meaningful life. They shared stories of her compassion, her dedication to her career, her love for her family, and her dreams for the future. They wanted the world to know that she was more than just a hashtag or a slogan. She was a daughter, sister, girlfriend, and healthcare worker whose life had value and meaning. "I haven't had time to grieve," Tamika Palmer said months after her daughter's death, highlighting the additional burden placed on families who lose loved ones to police violence. Instead of being allowed to mourn privately, they often find themselves thrust into the public eye, forced to become advocates and activists while still processing their own trauma and loss. The impact of Breonna's death extended far beyond her immediate family and friends. Her colleagues in the emergency room mourned the loss of a dedicated team member who had made their workplace better through her competence and compassion. Patients she had cared for over the years were unaware that the kind young woman who had comforted them during their medical crises was now gone, but her influence on their care and recovery lived on in the memories of those who had worked alongside her. Taylor, born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where she was raised by her mother, is remembered as full of life and potential. This description captures the essence of who Breonna was: a young woman whose life was just beginning to unfold, whose best years and greatest contributions were likely still ahead of her when her life was cut short. The tragedy of Breonna Taylor's death lies not just in the violence of that March night, but in all the possibilities that died with her. The children she and Kenneth had planned to have, the patients she would have saved in her career as a nurse, the family moments and milestones she would have shared with her loved ones, all of these potential futures were erased in a few seconds of gunfire and confusion. As time has passed since that terrible night, Breonna's story has continued to resonate with people around the world who recognize in her death a symbol of the need for fundamental changes in how police interact with communities, particularly communities of color. Her case has contributed to important conversations about the use of no-knock warrants, the militarization of police forces, and the need for greater accountability when officers' actions result in the death of innocent people. The baby Air Jordans that Breonna and Kenneth had purchased together remain a powerful symbol of dreams deferred and futures lost. These tiny shoes, meant for a child who would never be born, represent not just their personal tragedy but the broader loss experienced by communities affected by police violence. They serve as a reminder that behind every case and every statistic is a real person with real relationships, dreams, and potential that can never be recovered. I can't believe it's a year later and we're still just asking people to do the right thing, her mother said. Tamika Palmer's words reflect the ongoing struggle for justice and accountability that continues long after the initial tragedy. For Breonna's family, the fight for justice is not just about holding specific officers accountable, but about ensuring that systemic changes are made to prevent other families from experiencing similar losses. The legacy of Breonna Taylor extends beyond the circumstances of her death to encompass the life she lived and the values she embodied. She represents the best of what public service can be: compassionate, dedicated, and focused on helping others during their most vulnerable moments. Her work in the emergency room, her kindness to neighbors and friends, and her commitment to building a better future for herself and her loved ones all serve as examples of how individual actions can make a positive difference in the world. As her case continues to work its way through the legal system and her name continues to be invoked in calls for police reform, Breonna Taylor's story serves as both a tragedy and a catalyst for change. Her death was senseless and preventable, but the response to her killing has sparked important conversations and pushed for reforms that could prevent similar tragedies in the future. For Kenneth Walker, the man who survived that terrible night, the trauma continues to shape his daily existence. Kenneth Walker says he asks himself daily why she was killed. His struggle to understand and cope with what happened reflects the broader trauma experienced by communities affected by police violence, where the search for meaning and justice can become all-consuming. The story of Breonna Taylor is ultimately a story about the value of human life and the responsibility we all share to protect and cherish it. Her death reminds us that behind every news story and every protest is a real person whose life mattered to the people who loved them. In remembering Breonna, we honor not just her memory but our collective commitment to building a society where everyone can feel safe in their own home, where justice is blind to race and status, and where every life is valued and protected. The apartment on Springfield Drive where Breonna Taylor drew her last breath stands as a testament to dreams interrupted and potential unrealized. But her legacy lives on in the continued fight for justice, in the reforms her death has helped inspire, and in the memories of those who knew and loved her. She was more than a victim. She was a healer, a daughter, a sister, a girlfriend, and a young woman whose life had meaning and value that extends far beyond the circumstances of her death. As we reflect on Breonna Taylor's story, we are reminded of our shared humanity and our collective responsibility to create a world where such tragedies are prevented. Her life, though cut short, continues to inspire change and challenge us to be better. In that way, her impact on the world extends far beyond her 26 years, touching lives and inspiring action in ways she could never have imagined during her time on Earth.